Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. Thank you as always for joining us this week. A lot going on, new FOIA lawsuits on topics ranging from abortion to the border crisis to what John Kerry, the Biden climate envoy, is up to and what he's charging us to fly around the world. Plus we have positive news, a new legal development in our case in Illinois, where we're trying to uphold the idea that it's election day, not election week or election month, but election day, and I'll talk about that. First up, obviously, maybe it's not obvious. Maybe you're not on Twitter and you don't care, but this is perhaps the biggest development for free speech and the First Amendment in recent memory, which is Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, which was finalized, and it's resulted in the leadership of Twitter being essentially fired by Musk, and the liberals are aghast because, as you know, the totalitarian left that is seeking to control and censor your speech online relies on fronts like Twitter to do their dirty deeds for them. It's not only their ideological allies that are pushing Twitter, or have been pushing Twitter to censor people who have conservative views or who have out of the mainstream views as far as the establishment is concerned, but you've also had government agencies pushing Twitter and other big tech companies to censor Americans in contravention of the First Amendment. Judicial Watch found and proved that was the case, at least with the California Secretary of State, who were suing for them getting YouTube to take down a video that I had made for Judicial Watch on election integrity. Even the Republican Secretary of State of Iowa was caught trying to censor Judicial Watch, pushing Twitter to try to censor us. California Secretary of State was pushing Twitter to censor Americans. And of course, the Biden administration has been unapologetic in pushing for the censorship of Americans on topics ranging from COVID to elections to pretty much anything that they consider to be politically inconvenient or something they don't want the American people finding out more about. So now the big question for Elon Musk is what he's going to do. And this is what I think he ought to do. He ought to unban accounts like President Trump's, who was banned for political purposes, using January 6th as the pretext. They need to uncensor the ability to debate controversial topics such as COVID, vaccines, and disputes about COVID policy. There's censorship on Twitter in the debate about transgender extremism. There is restraint or restrictions on Twitter about still election controversies. And if they don't censor you outright, they're likely to label and suppress your tweet in a way that is effectively censorship. So now what's going to happen is Musk is going to be targeted. He already has been targeted by the left. I semi-joked earlier that the left's Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings has settled its gaze on Elon Musk. And you can bet the Biden administration is going to pressure and target Musk over his management of Twitter. Certainly the EU, some left-wing socialist bureaucrat from France and the EU threatened Musk and Twitter, saying they're going to have to play by our rules, which of course is rules that would require censorship of Americans in contravention of any notions of free speech or, in my view, the First Amendment. You know, and despite what you hear from the dishonest left, the First Amendment does apply, in my view at least, to these big tech platforms. There are two issues: whether the First Amendment applies, and when they're acting at the behest of the government, they are acting as government agents. And generally speaking, these platforms are like public utilities, and you have a right to access that. without fear of being targeted because of your speech. And secondly, there's this business ethics issue, and there's this rule of law issue, where they are targeting people because of their conservative speech, or speech that is politically inconvenient to the left-wing crowd, and they're telling government regulators, they're testifying to Congress, and they're telling consumers and telling users that they're being censored for other reasons, that it's just regular moderation and there's no targeting. And that simply isn't true. We've shown it isn't true, and it's easily demonstrated it isn't true. So when you lie to shareholders, when you lie to regulators, when you lie to Congress, when you lie to consumers, those raise questions of fraud that should be investigated, in my view, by law enforcement. And Elon Musk, he's probably not going to want to hear this, but he needs to expose the corruption of Twitter. He needs to highlight and figure out what Twitter had been misusing shareholder dollars to accomplish, which is to advance the interest of government agencies, also to advance the interests of political forces, specifically the Democrats and the Biden campaign. Remember, they were suppressing the New York Post story about Hunter's laptop, Twitter, and some of these other big media big tech platforms. So if I had purchased an entity for $44 billion, I'd like to know what the heck they've been doing beforehand that caused so much controversy to make sure it doesn't happen again. So Musk should embrace free speech. He should embrace the First Amendment. And as importantly, he should expose what went on before he took over the company so that it doesn't happen again. And he said repeatedly that he's doing this in the public interest. He's interested in advancing humanity, as the word he uses. But as an American citizen, as an American company, I would hope he would make it a priority to protect the free speech rights of American citizens from predations by the government that have used companies like Twitter to go after innocent Americans. And so we'll see what happens. Judicial Watch is on Twitter. I've been on Twitter. I was locked out of Twitter for several months because I innocently tweeted. I guess it wasn't so innocent. I knew what I was doing, but I knew it was accurate. An accurate tweet about hydroxychloroquine. I knew it was accurate. I tweeted it. Twitter had received complaints about it, and they told me specifically there was nothing wrong with the tweet. And then January 8th, 2021, which I think it's not coincidental, it was around the same time that Trump was thrown off, they told me I needed to delete that tweet or I'd be locked out. And I didn't want to delete the tweet, and I didn't delete it for at least, I think it was 10 months by the time I decided to come back on. And they ignored my appeal. I said, look, you had approved this before. Why are you telling me I can't tweet this again? They ignored it. And just a real contempt for the free speech rights of not only me, but of course of Judicial Watch. And this is the important thing. When they go after someone like me, and I'm not tooting my own horn, but I do lead one of the largest grassroots organizations in the country, a major government watchdog group, and what better favor for the Biden administration than to shut my voice down and suppress the voice of Judicial Watch as the Biden administration comes in and starts doing what it did. And of course, it's a general, we're also a general watchdog, and of course it protects all sorts of other politicians as well, both Democrat, frankly, and Republican. So that's what Twitter's about. They were about censoring people dishonestly. And now I hope Elon Musk is true to his word and starts bringing people back onto the platform who have been denied access. And just to the degree that Twitter or big tech companies want to censor, obviously pornography, obscenity, violence, and threats like that, that's illegal. That's legal activity. That sort of activity can be censored. It's not speech. But speech that's censored, that really shouldn't be happening on these supposedly neutral big tech platforms. And if they're not going to be neutral, then they should be treated like publications and be subject to the same restraints and rules and laws that publications are treated. And that means that if someone comes on and defames you on a platform, then you should be liable. Because if you're going to play editor, then you're playing you're a publication, and you're not the sort of entity that's envisioned under federal law as being sort of a neutral bulletin board. So these companies have wanted to have their cake and eat it too, which is they wanted to play editor and put their thumb on the scale on behalf of politicians and attack their political opponents while pretending they're neutral. And that's a big lie. That's a big lie. And let's hope it ends, and let's hope we get more free speech. And the left is going to be very nasty towards Elon Musk. And it doesn't mean I agree with Musk on all of his policies and everything he says. I mean, that's not the issue. The issue is this someone who wants to protect the rule of law and protect free speech? And when you see a group go after that, we should rally around it. And so to the degree Musk is going to be on the side of free speech, we should be supporting it. And in the meantime, we're not going to put all our eggs in Twitter's basket. Judicial Watch and I are on Truth Social, Parler, Rumble. What other alternative sites are there? Telegram, Getter, Gettr, and of course we're on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. We have a lawsuit, as I said, against California Secretary of State over their getting YouTube to censor a video. So this censorship issue ain't going away, and Twitter is just one part of the battle, but it's a significant one, and I hope Facebook and YouTube, and because YouTube is owned by Google, so you know, start following Elon Musk's lead and start focusing on empowering their users rather than treating them like children or like cogs in the left-wing Marxist political machine. So there's that. Next up, and this is why Judicial Watch's voice is so important, because the work we do is essential to the functioning of a healthy Republican form of government. How is it we can have a consent of the government, the consent of the governed, if the governed don't know what the government's up to? And in this day and age of big government, there's a lot that we don't know what the government's up to on. And Judicial Watch's essential leading role is figuring out how the government's using your tax dollars. Usually it's for no good ends. And we sue in court under the Freedom of Information Act to find out information about what the government's doing. And we focus on corruption issues, obviously, because to the degree the government's doing anything, it should be done honestly. It shouldn't be used, the powers of government shouldn't be used to abuse the rule of law. And so Judicial Watch is taking a leadership role, both from the left and the right. I don't think anyone sues more than Judicial Watch under the Freedom of Information Act. So we've got, I think we filed about half a dozen lawsuits in the last 2 weeks under the Freedom of Information Act. I'm going to talk about a few of them. The first one relates to, and what I love about Judicial Watch is that the FOIA is a way to uncover information about issues that are, sometimes they're not all that exciting, or it doesn't have a strong public, a lot of the people don't know about it, but they should know about it. But sometimes there are a lot of issues out there that, despite you would think, oh, you know, don't we have all the information on this big issue? No, we don't, because no one cares. The media doesn't care. Congress doesn't care. So it's Judicial Watch to the rescue in terms of figuring out what's been going on. And one of these issues is the border crisis. We have nearly 5 million people over the last 2 years enter the United States of America illegally under the Biden border crisis, an invasion aided and abetted by the President of the United States and his top officials in the various agencies responsible for border security and national security. So there's a crisis beyond belief. Just think of that number. And in addition to that number, I don't know if the number is in addition to, but as part of this number at least, you have children being trafficked into the United States. So this human trafficking operation not only involves adults, but involves children. So just this is the way it works. Virtually no one crosses the border without the permission of the cartels. It's a trafficking operation. And what happens is they cross the border, not nearly enough are turned away. Millions fraudulently claim asylum. And the Biden administration has pretended that the law requires them to let anyone in who claims asylum and let them stay here, even though they're here illegally. So when you hear everyone says, well, they're asylum seekers, that doesn't mean they can stay here. They're here illegally. Crossing the border illegally and claiming asylum doesn't give you a deportation, I guess a get-out-of-jail-free card in terms of deportation. And of course, more recently, in recent years, they've used children as a vehicle to get to break the border and also to bring in, quote, family units, even though a lot of them aren't even families. So the children are being misused in ways that are outrageous. And what Judicial Watch is doing is that we've sued, most recently, the Health and Human Services Department, which is supposed to handle unaccompanied alien children and provide them, you know, obviously protection and other benefits once they're here in the United States. And what's going on is they're trafficking these children effectively. That's the way I read it. Is they're helping the children and the parents that are with the children, or the adults who are with the children. They come in, and even if they're alone, they come in, they try to figure out who's the responsible party for them, and they'll send them along to them. Doesn't matter if the responsible party is an illegal alien or was involved in actually trafficking the child. I mean, that's the status of the rule of law crisis when it comes to handling unaccompanied alien children. Now, a lot of this has been going on in a place you probably didn't think about. It's in Tennessee. There was a letter in May of 2021 to the HHS Secretary, Xavier Becerra, and the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, from Tennessee Senators Marsha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty, and Congressman Chuck Fleischman also wrote the letter. We write to seek information on the Department of Health and Human Services management of unaccompanied alien children in federal custody and the facilities used to house them. We are particularly concerned about recent reports regarding the use of Chattanooga, Tennessee as a central location for resettling UACs in the United States, UACs being an acronym for unaccompanied alien children. There are media reports that within the last week, at least 4 planes carrying UACs landed at Wilson Air Center in Chattanooga before swiftly boarding the children onto buses and transporting them to multiple cities across the southeastern United States for apparent resettlement, with zero transparency regarding what was happening. For months, reports have detailed how thousands of children are being housed in neglectful conditions at mass shelters operated by HHS under a veil of secrecy. We're deeply troubled by the lack of transparency and accountability regarding conditions that HHS is subjecting these children to. Several governors, including Governor Bill Lee of Tennessee, have written Biden expressing alarm over how the federal government has circumvented state authorities by placing unaccompanied alien children in their state's facilities with little transparency, consent, or coordination. So you hear the left going crazy because you have the governors of Texas and Florida sending illegal aliens to New York and Washington, D.C. and Chicago, and the liberal mayors of those cities pretending that's an outrage. And it's the only reason it's an outrage is because it's a visible transportation of illegal aliens into those cities. Because when you're talking about 5 million people coming into the United States over the last 2 years or so, obviously those cities are swamped as it is. But they are able to pretend it's not an issue because there's no visible, visible invasion really of the city. But when the buses arrive in a public way, it drives the left crazy because they get hoisted on their own petard when it comes to their sanctuary city policies, which of course encourage the invasion that's underway, that they're complaining about. And part of that, and the other hypocrisy, of course, the Biden administration has been harassing DeSantis and Governor Abbott in Texas over this, is that the Biden administration is doing the exact same thing in the cover of night, or in a secretive way, as we're highlighting here, with children. So these children are not supposed to be not supposed to be here in the United States. And to the degree they are there with their parents, or we can attach them to parents, they should all be removed. I mean, how can you resettle them with a foreign national who's unlawfully present? How is that not participating in child smuggling? So what we did was we asked last year, and we haven't gotten an answer yet. So we've waited over a year to sue for all documents related to the preparation of logistics involved in the transportation of UACs to and from Tennessee, that Chattanooga Wilson that Wilson Air Center, and all official internal email communications related to that transportation network. So what's happening is, as alleged here, is that these unaccompanied children are being trafficked into the United States, and then the baton is handed to the Biden administration, who bring the children over to Tennessee, and through Tennessee, these children are then smuggled further to the endpoints, and who knows where they're being smuggled to after the fact. So this is like a human rights crisis, and the Biden administration is enabling the largest human trafficking operation in world history. Forget about in American history. There's nothing comparable in the world where you've had human trafficking of the numbers that are involved with the cartels moving human bodies across the southern border with Mexico. And just with the kids alone, and I'm sure this is just a fraction of the numbers, CBS reported that 130,000 minors have been entered into the system in the fiscal year so far. I think it's practically speaking almost over. And that's even more than last year. So it's, say, 250,000 minors over the last 2 years who have been trafficked into the United States, 250,000. And there's no sign that it's going to slow down. And of course, when you have an open border, and in my view it is an open border, despite government lies to the contrary, how can you expect this not to happen? Judicial Watch already uncovered the deplorable conditions. And when you have numbers like this, you could be Mother Teresa, and you're going to have trouble providing shelter to these large numbers. And of course, we uncovered documents that a large number of adults were posing as minors. So I'm being charitable in describing all of these kids as minors. For all we know, they're adults. There's no reasonable way we can have of figuring out if they're children or adults, because of the lack of documentation. The left celebrates undocumented aliens. Well, that means we don't know how old they are. And some come in knowing they'll be treated specially, alleging they're minors when in fact they're adults, and usually young male adults. So this is it's a humanitarian crisis. It's a public safety crisis, because these children are in conditions where they are more likely to be harmed, and obviously the staff caring for them are more likely to be harmed. And it's a rule of law crisis, because none of them are supposed to be here. And if we had a border that was protected and secure, we wouldn't have this issue. And I don't, illegal aliens, they have no right to be here. I don't blame them or are angry at them for crossing the border illegally. I mean, if you support the rights of illegal aliens and protecting them, you want a secure border. Because it's a deadly business. It's a dangerous business. And where you have child trafficking and human trafficking, you have sex trafficking as well. It's monstrous what's going on with the support of the Biden administration, because they've opened the spigot at the border and they refuse to close it, and they know they can close it, but because they're extremists, and in my view, I don't see how anyone who loves America would want this to continue. I don't know how anyone who wants America to continue as a nation would want this to continue. The conclusion I draw is that these policies are designed to destroy the country. And I hope the new Congress, and I don't know if it's going to be controlled by Republicans or Democrats, certainly it's likely the House will be controlled by Republicans. I mean, if they don't get on the ball in terms of doing something about this, on the funding issue, on the rule of law issue, and frankly on the impeachment issue, then what are they going to be there for? Our country's under attack. This is an invasion. And these cartels are as much our enemies as anything you read about from North Korea or China or Russia. And it's on our border, and the threat is a clear and present danger. So I know it's just one lawsuit about the way kids are being treated in this illegal immigration crisis, but you pull that string and it unravels the larger crisis we're in as a nation, thanks to the purposeful and reckless policies of this administration. It's been a few months since Roe versus Wade was overturned in the Dobbs decision, a wonderful decision, the Dobbs decision, that restored the rule of law, undid a constitutional abomination, which is the Roe versus Wade decision, and returned to the states the ability, and frankly to the federal government, the ability to extend further the protections of life to the innocent, unborn human beings that under Roe have had virtually little or no protection. Even now, there are unborn babies or babies who have been born as a result of abortion restrictions and pro-life protections that otherwise would not be alive today. So we should be celebrating the overturning of Roe versus Wade, because states are protecting lives as a result, and lives are being protected. Now, of course, the left has gone, the pro-abortion left has gone crazy, and they're desperate to continue under this culture of death, fanaticism, the abortion regime. And one way they're trying to do this is by pushing chemical abortions, pushing women to kill their unborn human offspring through by taking a pill. And the pills are designed to be taken within a certain period of pregnancy, presumably under the supervision of a doctor, which the left doesn't want to happen. And as it's barbaric, you know, to have women killing their unborn children at home. It's just barbaric, but that's what they want. And it's a significant, it's probably the most likely way an unborn human being is going to lose their life is through, quote, medicine that kills lives. And this pill is called mifepristone, which was formerly known as RU-486. And the left is trying to get it into states where it's banned, with a wink and a nod from the Biden administration and the left media that's celebrating the lawlessness that's leading to unborn lives being lost and women and being put in danger by taking medication outside the law. And what Judicial Watch is doing, because we know the way the government works, you know, when we talk about the COVID vaccines and the COVID debates, you know, Judicial Watch has been battling the CDC, the FDA, HHS on public health matters for decades. We've known they've been corrupt for decades. So everything that you're outraged about in terms of vaccines or COVID policies, it's no surprise that they behaved the way they did to us, because they have long been as politicized as any other so-called deep state agency, especially on abortion, where this abortion pill was approved and rushed through unprecedented intervention by the Clinton administration. Judicial Watch exposed that in a series of Freedom of Information Act requests that we led on many years ago. So one thing that we're very interested in, obviously, is the safety of this abortion pill. Have they bent the rules? Have they done anything unusual? Or are they doing anything unusual as it relates to the so-called safety and efficacy of these abortion pills? And I hate to even use the word efficacy, because we know what the goal of the abortion pill is. It's to take the life of an unborn human being. So we asked records for correspondence with the manufacturers of Mifeprex regarding this drug stability, and for all FDA reports from assessments of Danco and GenBio manufacturing facilities. And Danco and GenBio are the front companies that are generating what I call, or manufacturing, these kill pills. The second request asked for investigational and new drug applications related to Mifeprex. The third request asked for stability test results for the drug Mifeprex, including records reflecting long-term stability, as well as accelerated and forced degradation results. What do we mean by stability? Well, it's a technical term, and I don't want to presume to be a medical expert, but generally my understanding is stability means, how long does the drug work for? How long is it good for? You know, when you see in your medicine cabinet a prescription medication, or even over the counter, they sometimes say, you know, use best by, or you know, best if used by, or throw out after a certain amount of time, because they think the drug doesn't work after a certain amount of time. Well, have those types of tests been conducted on this abortion pill that they're trying to foist on women? And if so, what has been the results? And also, what about these manufacturing facilities? You know, where are they being manufactured? How are they being manufactured? Are they being manufactured in safe conditions? And as I say, we know already politics has infected the public policies around and the analysis of the abortion pills. So we're suspicious. And you know why else we're suspicious? Because they refuse to give us the darn documents. So the rule of law requires, the FOIA law requires, federal transparency law requires that we get these documents. But they're refusing to give us the documents, which suggests they have something to hide. So as I said earlier, in response to pressure from the pro-abortion fanatics, the Clinton FDA approved this abortion pill back in September of 2000. And it was pushed out of the White House. It's pretty clear Hillary had her hands in this. And this was in September of 2000. So it was one of the last big acts by President Bill Clinton, was to take this radical move to approve these abortion pills, despite all the concerns about whether it was safe. And of course, the Biden administration, which has made abortion and the promotion of the killing of unborn human beings throughout the entire 9 months of pregnancy with taxpayer dollars, one of their central tenets, is pushing to prevent states from restricting access to the controversial abortion drug. They think if you ban abortion in a state, it shouldn't apply to abortion pills. I mean, it's crazy. And so, as I said, our experience is that this chemical abortion pill did not and will not receive appropriate review from the politicized FDA. And it's outrageous that Judicial Watch has had to sue in federal court for basic safety information about the abortion pill, which is being pushed on women by a desperate pro-abortion movement. Now, back in 2006, after years of investigating this pill, we released a special report containing records that shed light on the Clinton administration's aggressive drive to push RU46, which is the first name of this pill, to market in the United States. And we got documents out of the Clinton library. And it took forever and a day to get those documents. As I said, it was 6 years later. We forced the FDA to release records about the drug, including, and this is a letter I think that is well worth repeating to you, because it was written by Tom Coburn, who then was an Oklahoma congressman. I think he's passed away. Has he passed away? I think he's since has passed away. I hope I'm not. Yeah, he has passed away. He was a good man. And he wrote a letter to one of these pro-abortion groups. In this case, it was the American College, ACOG, with the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. He wrote, "It was a sad day when the FDA approved RU46, the abortion pill, the first drug ever approved for the specific purpose of ending a human life. But that was made even worse by the fact that the FDA succumbed to the political pressure brought by this association and other elements of the abortion lobby by dropping most of the proposed patient protections and thereby recklessly exposing women to avoidable risk." So, this is, if you have reason to distrust the COVID vaccine, I tell you what, look up RU486 and the way this drug was approved, the way it's being used, and the consequences of it for women, and your heart will stop. And I'm proud that Judicial Watch is taking the lead on this issue that the major media has zero interest in not only pursuing, but actually would actively oppose this type of transparency that we're trying to bring to bear in order to not only protect the lives of the unborn, but to protect the health and safety of women. And yes, women, not men, women who are pregnant, not men, because men aren't pregnant and can't get pregnant. Am I allowed to say that? Don't get me started about how all the media and some of these even scientific entities are now talking about pregnant people, which is really misogynistic, isn't it? So I digress. Next up, in terms of FOIA, I can't keep up with all of our FOIA work. I mean, we're doing so much. We have hundreds, thousands of requests out there, hundreds of lawsuits over the years, and we're just piling on because we're in crisis. I don't know about you, but we can't file enough FOIA lawsuits. And there's so much, the left is up to so much, the left is up to no good in so many ways in our government. As I said, we just can't do enough. And, one of the biggest scams out there, in my view, is the climate scam. And I tell you, for whatever reason, whenever I'm criticized online, besides attacking my personal appearance, is the left is obsessed with saying I'm a climate denialist or a denier. Denier. I don't even know what that means. Because I dispute the radical leftist, socialist, totalitarian approach to controlling energy, the economy, and all of our lives, using alleged increases in temperature as a pretext? Yeah, I guess that makes me a climate denier, I guess, right? Well, of course, it doesn't scare us from doing the heavy lifting to figure out more about this climate scam, which I think I described quite fairly. And isn't it so true? We talk about limousine liberals, and I think we have to kind of escalate that. We have to talk about private jet plane liberals. People like John Kerry and these Hollywood and types who use private jets to fly to climate change conferences and big government jets to fly to climate change conferences, and in a way that probably promotes more carbon distribution than anything else they're complaining about. Now, on the other hand, I don't think jet travel increases global temperatures. I don't think carbon has a significant impact on global temperatures, but that's another matter. But they don't want us to drive cars, but they can fly jets, right? So I digress again. But that issue is interesting, but it's especially interesting when they're hiding records about what they're doing in this area. And John Kerry, who was one of the most corrupt State Department secretaries in the history of the United States, was appointed by Joe Biden to be his climate czar, or excuse me, his climate envoy. He, of course, doesn't want anyone to know what he's actually doing with tax dollars, John Kerry. We had asked for copies of all records concerning individual authorizations for and the costs of John Kerry for any official travel from January to present. The request includes any reimbursement amounts the government paid to Mr. Kerry. All calendar or calendar entries for John Kerry, whether made by him personally or on his behalf from January 21st to the present. Copies of all organizational charts for the Office of Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, including any sub-organizations reflecting names and or position titles of each individual in these positions. Obviously, we don't want their social security numbers, but we want to know who the heck is working for them and what they're doing. So, do I need to tell you that the fact that we can't get this information is a scandal? An outrageous scandal? What are they hiding? I mean, we have a right to know what John Kerry's up to, what we're paying to fly him around the world, and who we're paying to actually work for him. Now, when I said he was a corrupt Secretary of State, one of the folks who has kind of gotten away from accountability under Durham's failed special counsel operation, many have gotten away, in my view, but John Kerry was one of the worst because his State Department was a vehicle and for spreading the fake dossier lies, for trying to undermine President Trump with illegal transfers of classified information and illegal leaks of classified information, and otherwise trying to upend the peaceful transfer of power. We hear that a lot with January 6th. John Kerry's State Department was literally rushing classified information out the door to friends in Congress in order to get Trump. We've got the proof. In fact, they were sending it out and kind of patting themselves on the back for meeting the deadline or beating the deadline. And what was the deadline? President Trump getting taking the oath of office. That was Kerry's State Department. He should have been on the dock for John Durham. Instead, he's flying around lecturing us on how we should destroy our economy in order to achieve his crazed climate agenda. Forgive me for being blunt, but that's the truth of it. So, yeah, we're suing to figure out what he's been doing for Joe Biden. But I tell you, we've been second to none in exposing what he did for Obama. And that's enough, frankly, to make him ineligible to have any position of public trust for the rest of his life, in the least. Talk about impeachment. He should be impeached for his handling of Russiagate under Obama, the corruption there. So in many places, we are able to vote, or you're able to vote early, which I think is a terrible thing. I think you should be able only to vote on Election Day. And to the degree we have mail-in balloting, it should only be done in extraordinary circumstances. You know, if you're in the military or deployed overseas, you know, or otherwise have significant emergencies, you need a really good excuse to do a mail-in ballot. That's the way it should be. I think typically you should be voting in person on one day, and we should be deciding the winner on Election Day. And of course, vote by mail has significant concerns about fraud, which also need to be addressed, and which many of the left refuse to address. And frankly, too many Republicans don't want to address as well. But one of the other big issues with vote by mail is how long you count the ballots for. I mean, is there a time when you stop? And is the time reasonable? And is the time compliant with the law? Is the deadline compliant with the law? And in Illinois, we alleged that contrary to federal law, Illinois is unlawfully counting ballots up to mail-in ballots that arrive up to 14 days after the election. So up to 2 weeks after Election Day, ballots are coming in And their theory is that if somehow the ballot is signed on election day or beforehand, but even if the postmark is undated, they'll count it for up to 2 weeks. I mean, besides the horrible policy of that in terms of encouraging fraud, waste, and abuse, in our lawsuit that we filed to try to stop it on behalf of a congressman and some other citizen voters of Illinois, the congressman is Congressman Bost, it's illegal under federal law, we alleged. And we had this litigation's ongoing. I don't know when the court's going to rule. I don't know if the court in theory could rule before Election Day, or it could rule after Election Day. But it would change the rules if we're successful. Certainly for the year 2024. I don't know what would happen in 2022. So I know there's great concern about the election counting that goes on seemingly forever, practically speaking, after Election Day. And it's just a terrible policy, I think, for obvious reasons. Don't you agree? And in addition, it's illegal because the federal law that we highlight, I think it's 3 U.S.C. Section 7. My colleagues will confirm that to me, and I'll fix it if I'm wrong. Basically says that Election Day is on Election Day for members of Congress, and similarly, it's Election Day is Election Day for the presidency. So this year it would affect election races at the federal level in Congress in 2024. Obviously, the presidency would be included as well. Now, the left tried to intervene in this lawsuit as a defendant. Now, what does that mean? It means they're trying to gum up our lawsuit by trying to come in and make it more difficult for us to litigate, because the lawsuit is against the essentially the election officials in Illinois, the Secretary of State and the Illinois State Board of Elections, and the Democratic Party of Illinois, represented by the law firm that founded by Mark Elias, the controversial former Clinton campaign lawyer, caught up in Russiagate, tried to intervene, and the court said no. The Democratic Party of Illinois cannot meet its burden to show that its interests will not be adequately represented by the parties to the case. As a result, the Democratic Party of Illinois is not entitled to intervene as of right. Separately, because allowing them to intervene would threaten to delay this time-sensitive case further, the court, in its discretion, just denies their motion seeking permission to intervene as a party under Rule 24B. Accordingly, the court denies the Democratic Party of Illinois' motion in its entirety. So here you had Mark Elias, the king of Democratic election lawyers, try to intervene for the Democratic Party, in our case, to muck it up, and the court said no. So the case is proceeding, and this is what the gravamen of the lawsuit that Judicial Watch has filed is about. The current Illinois election law allows vote-by-mail ballots received up to 14 days after the polls close on Election Day to be counted as if they were cast and received on or before Election Day. Illinois law also provides that even vote-by-mail ballots without postmarks shall be counted if received up to 14 calendar days after Election Day if the ballots are dated on or before Election Day. I mean, obviously inappropriate. Our lawsuit notes that the board was advised that the number of ballots received after Election Day through November 17, 2020 could materially affect the unofficial election results. Illinois' own data indicates that Illinois received 266,417 vote-by-mail ballots statewide during the period from November 3rd through November 17th. Most of the vote-by-mail ballots were received after Election Day, which would mean that as many as 4.4% of the votes cast in 2020 were received after Election Day. I mean, what if you showed up to vote the day after the election in person and said, you need to count my vote. I knew who I was going to vote for yesterday, and I want you to count my vote today. I mean, and what the left's argument is is that, well, the vote really is cast if it's mailed before Election Day. First of all, if it's undated, you don't know when it's mailed. But if it's cast, then why does the law, generally speaking, allow you to go in and change your vote before Election Day? If it's already been cast, how can you change it? So they can't have their cake and eat it too. And it's just terrible policy. If you're going to vote by mail, make sure it gets there by Election Day. That's when it's supposed to be counted. That's what we argue in the lawsuit, at least. Judicial Watch argues that holding voting open for 14 days past Election Day violates the constitutional rights of voters and candidates by counting untimely and illegal ballots received after Election Day and diluting plaintiffs' timely cast and received ballots. Defendants, which is the state of Illinois here, acting under color of law, as it deprived and are depriving our clients of rights protected under the First Amendment and 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in violation of 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. It's a civil rights claim. So the Democratic Party failed to gum up this important lawsuit for election integrity. And, as I said in our press release, we're supposed to have an election day, not election weeks or election months. Illinois' 14-day extension of Election Day beyond the date set by Congress is illegal, violates the civil rights of voters, and encourages fraud. Now, as I highlighted last week, Delaware, the Supreme Court there threw out a state vote-by-mail and same-day voter registration statute that violated Delaware's Constitution. So we're not alleging that they broke the law in the sense that there's a constitutional prohibition in Illinois on this necessarily. We're highlighting that this violates federal law and violates the constitutional rights under the federal system of voters when you start counting ballots way past Election Day like this. I mean, this is straightforward. So this is an important lawsuit, and it's one of many that Judicial Watch has to defend the rule of law on elections and to protect election integrity. We have lawsuits to clean up election rolls that are ongoing in Pennsylvania, in Colorado, in New York. We have a lawsuit related to getting access to election rolls. Another lawsuit in Illinois too. So we've got two lawsuits in Illinois. We filed a successful lawsuit in Maryland over rigging elections under gerrymandering. We stopped that and made sure that in that case it was the Democratic Party wasn't able to rig elections in Maryland and restricted that. So that was a great victory. These lawsuits to clean up election rolls led to massive cleanups in North Carolina and in California and in Kentucky. And I know in Pennsylvania, for instance, we sent a letter to one state saying you haven't cleaned up the rolls, and they said, thank you, we just cleaned up 69,000 names. So we do know that other states clean up their rolls when we say there's a problem here. Even though I object to vote by mail, one of the reasons that I object is because I know the voting rolls are a disaster. They're hard to keep track of, and the best way to mitigate against having dishonest or dirty election rolls is to have folks vote in person. And the best way would be to have them present a voter ID, but that's a whole other matter. So the voting rolls are a mess in too many states, and Judicial Watch is doing its darndest, often successfully, to clean them up. So this core issue, though, was at the heart of a lot of disputes about 2020. Anyone who's observed vote by mail and counting ballots after Election Day, they know it's a problem. People don't trust the result when you start changing numbers after Election Day as a result of continued vote counting. That was the whole dispute about 2020. I shouldn't say the whole dispute, but it was a key dispute about 2020, where the President of the United States had a certain number of votes on Election Day, Trump did, and if they had counted all the votes they had, if they counted the votes they counted on Election Day showed that he was winning. And the vote totals changed, and he, quote, lost after Election Day as a result of additional vote counting that was conducted in an unprecedented fashion. So as a result, people don't trust the results. And in addition, there's legal problems with it. as we're alleging in Illinois. Now, YouTube is going to censor me if I say that fraud had a material impact on the 2020 election. And I'm not saying that in this case. What I'm saying is there are legal disputes about the counting of ballots after Election Day. And the left would have you believe, don't ignore the law, ignore the Constitution, and ignore plain common sense. And in my view, the left doesn't even like elections. I mean, we had this debate. I mean, if you want to see the absurdity of this elections craziness where you have early voting and vote by mail that take place 45 days ahead of an election. In Pennsylvania, had this big debate between the two candidates, Fetterman and Oz. And just think about that. I mean, people had voted already as far as a month before the debate. I mean, you could have voted for Fetterman and saw his behavior at the debate or his his obvious cognitive challenges and health challenges and said, boy, why did I vote for him? Or on the other hand, you could have seen Dr. Oz and said, I don't like what he's saying. Why did I vote for him? I should have known. It's too late. It's a terrible policy. I don't know why the left opposes, well, I do know why the left opposes Election Day. Because it provides more opportunities to game the system if you spread it out further. You provide access to the ballot 45 days ahead of time. The votes begin 45 days, as early as 45 days ahead of time. 2 weeks after Election Day, at least. Sometimes, I think it's up to 30 days in some jurisdictions. So you don't have an election day, you have election months. That's insanity. And to the degree it's unlawful, Judicial Watch is going to challenge it. So no, we haven't forgotten about election integrity. We haven't forgotten about the issues of 2020. We're trying to fix the structure of our election systems in a way that reassure the American people that their votes will be counted in an honest way and in a system in which they can have confidence in, no matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat or whatever. So, not only do we need to have systems in place to check fraud, but we need to reassure the American people that there's at least reasonable attempts made to check fraud. I know the left is crazed that they talked about these modest changes in Georgia as being worse than Jim Crow. And now they're having to explain, well, if things are so terrible down there, why is voter turnout increasing? And it's no surprise to me that voter turnout is increasing in election systems where there is more security. Because if people think their votes are going to count, they're more likely to vote. So what better way to encourage voter turnout than to provide systems in place and a way of counting that assures people that their votes are going to be counted and that in the least there isn't the appearance that the system will be gamed. So this is a core issue. It's obviously going on now, but it's going to go on over the next 2 years, and Judicial Watch is in it for the long haul. I encourage you to support our work. We've been doing this for well over a decade. In fact, I was counting ballots. Judicial Watch was counting ballots way back in 2000 in Florida. I know how these games are played. I've been doing it longer than I probably want to admit to. 20 plus years of battling for clean elections. And those were paper ballots. So don't think just because, I know there are many people who don't like the computer systems, and I don't blame them for that, but don't think they won't try to cheat even with paper ballots. I mean, you've got to watch elections all the time. And so Judicial Watch has been instrumental in taking the lead on behalf of election integrity, and we will continue to do so despite the less efforts to try to, frankly, jail people who have questions about election integrity. And with that, I encourage you to support Judicial Watch. We're oftentimes, and too often, the only game in town when it comes to uncovering and exposing and stopping government corruption. But we're able to do it thanks to the strong support of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans just like you. And if you're already supporting us, thank you. If not, I encourage you to support our work at judicialwatch.org, judicialwatch.org. And I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.